Hi, everyone, and welcome to the STEP webinar on demystifying the publishing process. We are going to get started in about 3 minutes. That gives everyone a chance to finish the login process. If you are already with us, we welcome you to use the chat window to introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, your affiliation, and maybe what you're writing at the moment. What is it that you're working on? Use that chat window. Just make sure it's set to all panelists and attendees so that everyone who's in the call can see who else is on that call. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So as I said a few minutes ago, welcome. This is the Demystifying the Publishing Process webinar through the STEP SIG. We are thrilled to have you here. My name is Laura Kennedy. I'm an assistant professor at Northern Michigan University, and I am one of 2 web managers for the SIG. We have a very ambitious agenda for this evening, or morning, or night, or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. So we're going to dive right in, and the panelists will introduce themselves as we get started. A few housekeeping things to remind you of. 1, we are recording the webinar, and the recording will be made available on our website later this week for folks who are not able to be here. And 2, in the chat window, please feel free to put questions as we go. We are structuring this webinar around the questions you already asked when you registered. But if other questions occur to you, feel free to put them into the chat window as we go, and I will do my best to incorporate them into our conversation. However, we could spend an entire hour on any one of these slides. So please understand if we might not get to every question. Okay, so let's start, if I can do this, with a brief overview as to what we're going to be talking about tonight. We'll begin with introductions from our panelists and then focus on the what, where, and when to publish. And then we will shift focus to issues around collaboration and co-authorship, feedback, and rejection, before turning it around or opening it up, I suppose, to Q&A from all of you. So to introduce panelists, we decided that we would pose an opening question to everyone. And that question is, over your career as an author, as a reviewer, as a publisher, as an editor, What is the greatest lesson you have learned about publishing? And Mandy, I'm going to come to you first. If you would like to introduce yourself and tell us the greatest lesson you've learned about publishing.
Sure. Thanks, Laura, for getting us started, and welcome everyone. It's just fantastic to see all the chat filling up with stories from people from all around the world. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night. Somebody is from South Africa at midnight, so that's great. Fantastic. Thank you. So as you know, I'm a co-editor of the journal Studying Teacher Education with Julian. I feel very privileged to be in that position. I'm a teacher educator and have been a self-study researcher for decades now. I say I'm getting pretty old. I work at Monash University, as you can see from the slide behind me, and there I'm the Associate Dean for Research. So I wear a variety of hats, which I hope will be helpful in bringing some ideas to your questions today. So in terms of Laura's question about the greatest lesson that I have learned, I think I take it from the author perspective. Persistence matters. And sometimes it can be very, very frustrating as an author, as you're waiting to hear the outcome of a particular paper, or as you're moving through the process from designing research to collecting data, writing it up, submitting it to a journal, waiting those months sometimes for feedback, getting a decision, and then potentially going through all of that process again as you're either going through a revisions process, or perhaps you've been rejected and you have to move to another journal. But the really important lesson through all of this is that you need to persist in order to be successful, and it can be really difficult, it can be really frustrating, it can take a really long time, but it's that very act of persistence, staying optimistic and working to improve the quality of your article that ultimately will see you as successful. So thanks, Laura, that's my lesson.
Wonderful. Let's go next to Hafdís.
Hi, I'm Hafdís Guðjónsdóttir, and I'm a professor at the University of Iceland. I just have to say that 20 years ago, I graduated with my dissertation, and when I graduated, I was a classroom teacher, and that's what I thought I was going to be my whole life, and I didn't understand anything about publication. I didn't know that one day I was becoming a writer and publishing. So the whole thing was a surprise to me. So I had to learn from scratch, from the beginning. And I must say I was surprised when I started to see my pieces published. The first one I tried out here in Iceland, I sent it to a journal. I got it back with some feedback, and I put it in my drawer. Got really angry because there were some suggestions that I needed to fix. And I thought, they are so rude. Why are they saying this with this wonderful piece? And 15 years later, when I was moving my office, I found the piece. I looked at it and I thought, oh, this is so supportive. Why? What did I see when I read it the first time? I never published that article. So one thing I'm going to say to all of you, when you get the feedback from the reviewers, read it more than once. Get somebody to help you read with it, because it's not as bad as it maybe sounds the first time when you go through. So be patient, be ready to listen to others, and especially the reviewers. Try to understand what they're saying. Don't just throw it in the drawer and wait for 15 years. So that would be my first experience that I just like to say to all of you. Be patient, and then I have, as you can hear, like many of you, I have to write. Most of what I write is in a foreign language to me, a language that I learned when I was a grown-up. So that's a big challenge also. But those challenges, they're good for you. You just learn more and more from those challenges. So that's about all I want to say right now. Okay.
Wonderful. Julian, you're next.
Okay, hello, I'm Julian Kitchen. I'm a professor at Brock University in Canada. I'm also with Mandy, the editor of Study and Teacher Education Journal, and I edited the self-study handbook, and I'm the series editor for Springer for books on self-study. So I'm wearing those hats as we speak. I agree with everything Mandy and Haftis have said, so I'm stroking those off my list. The piece I'll add mainly would be build relationships. My first pieces in Studying Teacher Education Journal, I was encouraged to submit by the editors, John Logren and Tom Russell. And I probably didn't think I was ready, and certainly not for people like Tom Russell and John Logren to be reading them. So I submitted. So building relationships, going to conferences, getting to know people, talking to people is an important part of the work, especially in a smaller discourse community such as self-study. So I would really encourage that. And don't be shy about starting those relationships. Don't be shy about saying hi to people at a conference. Don't be shy about talking to a publisher for one of the publishers that accepts work in your area and ask about an edited volume or something that you could contribute. What I found is that if you keep your light under a bushel, no one knows it's there, but if you at least broadcast it, even though you think it's not as good as it could be, you'll be surprised that some people will pick it up and give you some opportunities. So put yourself out there and build relationships, and that'll make a really big difference with articles for journals, but especially if you're looking at possibly writing chapters in books. Those are often handled by people saying, well, I know someone who'd be good for that. And then they email you and ask if you'd like to write a chapter.
Wonderful. So our first set of questions all revolve around what to publish. We have many graduate students on the call tonight, and they're asking about the differences between publication types, book chapters versus journal articles, researcher versus practitioner pieces. And that's one question. The second would be, how do you take something the size of a dissertation and break it down into multiple publications? Julian, I'm going to come to you with these questions.
Okay, well, I'll start by saying, first of all, submit. Don't hesitate and wait till it's perfect. Submit something. One of the first pieces I had published was in a Canadian journal, and a colleague of mine said afterwards he was impressed that I had that piece in that journal, and because it was a top-tier journal. And I said, oh, if I'd known it was a top-tier journal, I wouldn't have submitted it. And I tell that story mainly because sometimes we underestimate ourselves. And so I would say submit somewhere and start high. If you think it's a piece that might be suitable for TATE, for example, teaching and teacher education, start there. And if they say, no, it's not for us, it's too narrow or whatever, then submit it somewhere else, maybe studying teacher education, or start with studying teacher education. If we don't accept it, it gets rejected out of hand, send it somewhere else. So think about where you might send it, or listen to the reviewers and incorporate their feedback in order to make it viable. So I would start there. Start with the best journal that you aspire to for that piece that's suitable, and then if that doesn't work out, go down the list a little bit to others. And also, since many of you are grad students, definitely find ways to publish from your dissertation. I think I published 5 or 6 pieces from my dissertation at various levels of quality journal, and but I just kind of threw it out there and said, oh, I'll try to write something from my first 2 chapters, see what happens. I'll write something from this chapter, see what happens. And I don't think I'm necessarily that good a writer, but I was persistent enough and cocky enough that the pieces actually got out there. So do the same.
I'm wondering about the third question on the screen.
Okay, I can accept. I remember my thesis advisor, Michael Connolly, said somewhat provocatively to all his grad students one year, there's no point presenting at a conference if you're not going to publish from it. that was deliberately over the top, but it was also one of the wisest things I've heard and carry with me. So you may not publish from everything you present at a conference, but if you only present at a conference, ultimately that's not sufficient. So try to find a way to convert that into an article, into a chapter in a book, into a proceedings, something. So try to think of writing as the end product, not presenting at ARA or the castle as the end product.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in with a couple of things in relation to the types of publications. I think thinking about the purpose of the work becomes really important into where you put your writing, if it's a book chapter or a journal article, etc. So we have a great series of self-study books that are specific around different topics, for example, different disciplinary areas of teaching, social studies, science, etc., or around social justice, for instance. So you can bring people together in order to have a greater exposure of your work through books and book chapters, journal articles, then thinking about research and practitioner pieces, studying teacher education. We publish both. So it's what is the nature of the work that you're doing and what's the most suitable place to put that. Sometimes if I'm figuring out some ideas and it's more exploratory, I think a book chapter can be more accommodating than that, and perhaps what the demands of a journal chapter, a journal article might ask for. So thinking about also where the audience is and who's likely to be looking at the work, and how you can get your ideas out there. And I totally agree with Julian. If the last place that your writing ends is a conference presentation, then it's wasteful in terms of where the work could be taken. And I'll wholeheartedly agree about moving from a conference presentation into a publication, just thinking about what is being reproduced, that you're not putting exactly the same thing into an article, and that you're shaping it in order to be substantially different to go into another outlet.
Can I add a little bit?
Yes, of course.
One process with that S-step uses is that if we go to the Castle conference and we write a proposal, and then we have to write a chapter that is published in the proceedings. And then I don't know how often I've heard Mandy say, expand your chapter and put it into an article and to the journal. And I think those steps, to take this in a step and write first like a big abstract like for ARA, or a short chapter for S-step, and then take the piece and develop it in a more serious article, is one of the really good things for you when you start. And not even when you start, it's almost with every project that you do, is to take it in steps like that. So that's one thing to do.
Okay. So the next question is, where do we submit? We got lots of questions around this first question. How do I identify a journal that aligns with my research topic? What do I need to know about the journal before I submit? For example, their preferences, whether or not it's open access, if there's publishing fees. Mandy, I'm going to come to you with these questions.
Okay, sure. And I'll invite Julian and Haftis to jump in as well for these two. So first of all, in terms of identifying journals that align with your research topic, what is your focus? Who are you citing? Where is the work of those people that you're citing being published? They should be important guides for you in terms of identifying journals. And as an editor of studying teacher education, one of the things that frustrates me a lot when I have articles that have been submitted is that people don't seem to have looked at what's already in the journal when they're submitting, or they're not building on the work of those people who have already contributed to the journal. So it's really, really important that you are understanding what is the argument that's being put forward in a particular community and how you can contribute to that. So you're looking at your citation list, you're looking at the people whose work is really important to you, and you're finding where they're published so you can start to build on, critique, align the work that you're doing with that. So that's one thing I would say. information about the journal that you need to know. Well, there's some basic kind of organizational things related to how long a piece could be. So one reason why automatically that we might reject your paper before it even goes to review is that it's over 10,000 words, and our journal is pretty generous actually when it comes to word count, because we will go around 9,000, almost up to 10,000 sometimes. You know, that you're de-identifying the work, that you're making sure that that you're following all of the kinds of requirements that are on the journal page in relation to what this journal focuses on and the kind of work that it accepts. So qualitative, quantitative, etc., those kinds of things need to be really clear to you from just looking at the journal page. In terms of open access, well, you know, there's all sorts of ways of being able to look at that. Some journals are hybrid, so self-study is not one of those, studying teacher education, but other journals I work for have a policy where you can pay to be published in there if you are accepted. So that hybrid journals, where there are some journals that are purely open access in terms of payment, and there's a huge variety in terms of quality around those kinds of journals. So you have to be extremely careful, talk with people who know about these things, do some exploration on the web in terms of quality about submitting to open access, because not only could you be losing out on putting your work in a really good place, but also could cost you a lot of money and it won't get a lot of exposure necessarily. Maybe your institution has views about publishing fees, etc. So all of those things are important for you to work out. In terms of a top tier journal, we'll just reiterate what Julian said before. Go for the top tier journal in your field. Don't be shy about doing that. Start at the top, and going back to my own words of wisdom, be persistent. You'll really benefit from having reviewers on those top journals, and also some people tend to underestimate their work, and putting it into those places is where it's going to get the maximum exposure. Self-study, if you're looking to publish a self-study, Studying Teacher Education is the top journal for self-study in its field, so that's where you should be aiming. But there are other journals, depending on the kind of work that you do, that are also receptive. International Journal of Science Education, for instance, has published self-studies. Tate, I think, Haftis will be able to tell us, has published self-studies. Many other journals will accept self-studies as long as you're doing what I said in the first part of this response, is attending to what that journal is on about and building that journal's arguments and extending them. Perhaps self-study is a really interesting perspective that hasn't been taken in that particular journal before, that would really be adding to what's going on. So I'll hand over to Julie and Haftis if they have some other comments I'd like to make in relation to this.
Haftis or Julian, anything to add?
Well, one thing would be choose a top journal that's realistic to your work. So for example, maybe some journals mainly take large-scale studies that somebody would do with a large research grant, and you're doing a small study of one teacher or two teachers, then that might not be suitable for that journal. So a high-quality journal for the kind of work you're doing. Know what counts where you're working or where you're aspiring to work. Monash, being a top-ranked university, has a list of what journals would be deemed truly worthy of a Monash professor versus just okay, versus we don't really care. So but at my university, which isn't as highly ranked, an article in a more modest journal might count just as much as one in a top-tier journal. So you want to know how a score is kept. Even with articles, chapters in books, some books are viewed to be peer-reviewed and have a higher status than others. And that may or may not matter in your university, but if it does matter in your university and you do not have tenure, then it would be wise to maybe, in making your choices, to choose a place where the work will be acknowledged by your institution. The other thing I would add is, with whom do you want to engage in conversation? If you send it off to a journal that no one in your field reads, even if it's accepted, does it really matter? So think about who you want to engage in conversation with, who is reading that journal, and are they the kind of people that should be looking at your work?
Thank you. Haftis, anything to add before we move on?
And no, I think I can just agree with everything they're saying. I think they've kind of covered what you have to think about. And of course, you have to think, like Julian said, that how valuable is the journal that you are writing, sending your manuscript to, or the books that you want to publish in. But also, we know that some things are more expensive than others. So sometimes you have to think about that. If you want to publish something that you would like students to read, then think of that, publishing something that they could afford or have an easy access to. So there are so many things about when you want to publish, where to publish, and where is the best way. So think of the purpose for you for publishing what you're publishing.
Right. So the next set of questions are about the timing of publishing. Julian, the first question is for you. When do you know the manuscript is quote unquote ready to be sent to the journal?
Well, I would say, first of all, don't second guess too much and submit it. That would be my main point. But it would be a good idea to have somebody read it first, even if they weren't in the field, just at least as a ordinary lay reader to catch coherence and flow and grammar and things like that. But then send it, because what you've written is not going to be perfect and you're going to get critiqued. So rather than wait till you think it's perfect and then be offended, just send it off anyway and see what happens. And you'd be surprised how successful you can be doing that. And if it gets rejected right immediately by the editor, let's say Mandy says it's not suitable for studying teacher education, well, then you know that, and either you can rewrite it to be ready, and sometimes Mandy would say something to the effect of, well, it's not quite right because, and then you could take it back and work on it. Or you send it somewhere else that might be more suitable for the kind of work that you're doing. But the worst thing to do is for you to be the adjudicator and rejecting yourself out of hand because you see all the warts in your work instead of letting other people have the opportunity to embrace it. So that'd be my main suggestion is don't spend too long thinking about it. Send it out, and when it comes back, make revisions as soon as you can, especially the ones that can be easily done, and then send it off again as soon as you can.
Great. Mandy, the second question is for you. Can you speak to how long it typically takes a piece to be published?
Yes, thanks, Laura. I can speak to that in relation to studying teacher education, and we are quite fast compared with other journals because we don't have as many submissions as some of the bigger teacher education journals. So for us, typically a review time is 1 to 2 months. Now, at the moment, because of the COVID situation, things are really changing in terms of intensification of people's work and their ability to be able to do reviews. So it's a little bit different at the moment in terms of a little bit longer that it takes for reviewers generally. But then after the piece is accepted, so let's say you've gone through a process, it might be 1 to 2 months to be reviewed, then potentially it could be up to about another 6 months if there's major revisions required. It has to go back to reviewers. And then when your piece is finally accepted, we'll go on to Julian. Julian will work with you in refining the piece for publication, and then it would go on to online first before it actually gets allocated to an issue. So it could be up to a year and a half altogether. But of course, you know, you're trying to have other pieces that you have in the process at the same time. And so that's probably a typical turnaround. It may be faster depending on whether we've had many submissions in that time, but expect the review time to be around about 1 to 2 months. And I totally confirm what Julian's saying in terms of once you've got your reviews back, work to turn that around quickly, because if you want to get it back to the reviewers, they're still so familiar with the sorts of things that you've been writing about, and it can move through the system faster than you feeling like a bit disenchanted because maybe you didn't get the reviews that you wanted, or you don't have time to work on it. Really try to keep that process going fast for yourself.
Great. Hafdis, is the timing similar for Tate?
It is similar. It's probably a little bit longer, and this time I have now been one of the two co-editors for 1.5 years. And when we took over, it was like we got just a whole bunch of manuscript into our laps, and things were going very slow when we worked very hard. And I felt like I was never gonna get through the pile. And then things were starting to just move very smoothly this year. And then COVID came along, and then we changed the system. So every time something like that happens, things slow down. But I have had articles that have gone through my hands. The shortest ever was 3 months. But that was an article that didn't have to improve a lot. But then the longest one I've seen is 2 years. So between that. So it depends a lot on the article, on the reviewers, just on the whole process. How fast are people moving?
Yeah. Okay. And Laura, can I just add a little bit here, because it's
Yes.
helpful for people to have a look at the opening page of a journal article, and you'll see when it was received and accepted. So you'll get a sense of the publishing time, and then you can figure out, they'll be different for different articles within the journal because of the amount of time that people take with revisions, etc. But you'll get an overall sense of the amount of time that it takes.
That's a great point. Thank you. The next set of questions asks you not to think as editors, but to think of your experiences as authors. So these are questions around collaboration and authorship. The first question I'm going to throw out to all three of you, and whoever wants to answer can. What are the pros and cons of doing collaborative co-authored work?
Can I begin?
Yes, please.
Just because I'm going through this right now. I'm on my sabbatical, and I'm working on 3 pieces of chapters and articles. And 2 of them I'm working with others. I'm collaborating. 1 of them I'm working by myself. And today I promised myself I will never do this again, to do this by myself, because I need the discussions. I need to take things in the findings and say, okay, what are we trying to say there? And I'm talking to myself and my flowers in my back garden, but still I just really miss the discussions that I have in the others. So I think I will go back, and I will always invite others to publish with me. And that's one thing I have done here in Iceland, because it's quite tough for us to get published. And if I'm invited to publish, I always try to invite somebody to come along. So, and not only for them, but maybe mostly for me, that because I just like to work with others. And I'm just, today I promised myself, don't do this again. So I would do that. And then wondering who's going to be the first author and all of that. We have just set up little things that if you want to be the first author, okay, you can be that, but then you have to be in charge. You have to be the one that is moving the article around. And then another thing we do, because there is a team of us that is publishing, we try to take turns. So we take turns to be the first author. When I started publishing, we used to do this in alphabetic order. And this tells you where I come from. I was an elementary teacher, and everything was in alphabetic order. And that's not a good thing to do. So, but collaborating is my way.
Great. Julian or Mandy, pros and cons of collaborative work?
I'm happy to jump in. I have to say, totally agree. For me, it's the fun part of writing. I really enjoy writing with other people, and it is a fantastic way to get to know your colleagues as well. I've written with a self-study colleague in the US, and we did all of our work over the internet together, so you don't have to be physically together, which is a good thing to know in these times, to be able to produce good work. And I suppose it's also important to find out from your own institution what gets valued. In Monash, where I work, all authors get equal credit for a co-authored paper, but some institutions want to see that you're the first author, or that you can produce sole authored work. Some disciplines are more leaning towards sole authored work compared with other disciplines. Certainly in self-study, we definitely are encouraging of collaborative co-authored work. It's the nature of the work that we do. And sometimes the pros can be, if you haven't clearly laid out in advance what are the expectations around when you want to get the work submitted, or what are the different jobs that people are committing themselves to do. I think that's really important to try and figure out those conversations as you're getting started, unless you know people and you have already a good understanding of what the authorship will be like. I can also point you to Taylor and Francis have a website called authorservices.taylorandfrancis.com, and it goes through, if you're named as a co-author, what this means, and your institution. I know again at Monash we also have policies around authorship, so you can find out from your own institution or your department about authorship and what that involves if you're a co-author, what you're expected to do.
I would agree with all those things. I think whether your paper is ultimately solo authored or co-authored, it's still wise to involve other people as critical friends or readers, because they offer important insights. And then it depends who's doing what and the importance. One factor could be who needs the paper more at the time. Maybe someone's going up for promotion. Maybe that's a good time for them to be the first author, and then you can be first author the next time. But mainly is who does the bulk of the work that comes into play. So sometimes I've been the lead author because I'm maybe it was a chapter I was asked to write, and I engaged someone to write with me, so it makes sense I'd be first author, or I've done the bulk of the work. But other times it's just we kind of rotate through the team so everyone has a chance. The biggest problem I find as an editor with co-authored work, especially if it's more than two authors, is that everyone needs to be heard in the article. So if you had three main themes in your self-study article, you feel you have to have 3 lengthy examples from each of you, which means 9 lengthy examples. And usually that's too much. So that's one of the challenges, is how do you edit out people? And a useful way could be maybe for theme 1 is a story from author 1, and that's dealt with at length. And then maybe a shorter example from author 2, and maybe a paragraph, and author 3 for a paragraph. And then for theme 2, have author 2 have her story be told, and then the other 2 pipe in shorter sections immediately afterwards. But I know as an editor or as a reviewer, sometimes I've been saying to people, this is just too much, or by covering too much, you're having to squeeze everything so none of them get developed properly. So another thing to think about in relation to that is, could you write more than one article based on that study with 3 of you? One that maybe foregrounds one theme of the 3 themes, with each of your stories there about that theme, or maybe one that foregrounds author 1's experiences, and then a related article for another journal that might focus more on the work of author 2. Maybe the first one is more a self-study, the second one is maybe geared towards a math journal because you're all math teachers. So think about how not everything that you have to say can fit into a 6,000 or 9,000 word article. In fact, if it doesn't fit in, that's a good thing. It's an opportunity to write 2 or 3 pieces. So don't think that you have to squeeze it all in. Sometimes ask, how can we actually parse it out into smaller pieces so that we can get 3 publications out of this rather than just 1?
Great. I want to look specifically at question 3 for a minute, knowing that we do have a lot of grad students on the call, and there's oftentimes a difficult conversation around authorship when it's grad students writing with advisors or grad students writing with other faculty members. Any tips for navigating that conversation?
I would say first, the main rule would be the person who's done the most work, the person who owns the research is the one who should typically be first author. So if I had a grad student, I either would expect the piece to be entirely hers and I would not be on it. I might be on if I did a lot and she insisted that I be on it. But typically I would say that it's hers. And certainly I would never be first author because that's her work. So I would say have the conversation, and the default is really who's done the bulk of the work, and that person typically should be the lead author.
Yeah, and these conversations can be awkward because of the power differential, especially in terms of thinking about grad student work. And so that's why if there is an institutional policy, if there is a department policy, if you can go to the, for instance, author services website and be able to use those documents, that can be ways for you to structure your conversation to support you to be able to feel more confident about saying the very things that Julian is, because it can be difficult. We hope that it's not difficult, but it can be difficult at times.
Great. Looking at the time, we're going to move on to going back to your hats as editors, reviewing or responding to reviewer feedback and accepting rejection, which we've already touched a little bit on. But as editors of journals, how do you decide if a manuscript that gets submitted actually goes out for review, or is it desk rejected? How is that decision made?
I will start to and try to explain. I'm an editor for a co-editor for 2 journals, and one is a small one. So that I'm not going to take that as an example, but I'm going to take it as an example of teacher and teacher education, or what we usually call TAID. I'm a co-editor there, and we get about 2,500 manuscripts per year. 2,500 per year. And we publish about 250 articles, something like that, about 10%. So 90% is in the end rejected. That's a high number. So some years ago, we tried to send them all out for reviews, but that was just too much for reviewers. They were just too busy going through manuscripts that really we knew were never going to get through. So the practice today is that the 2 co-authors, we go through all of the manuscripts that we get, and we decide which ones will go to the other editors, and from them, they can decide to reject or send it to other reviewers. We desk reject about 50% of what we get. And when I started this, I found this very difficult. I'm a special educator. I'm a teacher. So I always felt in the beginning, if a manuscript was not good enough, I needed to teach that author how to write a good manuscript. And it was very difficult to put on a new hat and say, now you're the editor. You are not the educator. You are not going to teach that person, because then that's all you can do in life. You will just stop sleeping and eating and everything. So we had to make a list. What is it? When we desk reject, what do I look at? One thing Mandy said earlier, it's just the words. The number of words. If they go below 5,000 or over 9,000, I'm just saying they are not respecting what is on the list, what you have to counter. So that one gets 1 minus. And then I go through things like just all those little things like with the references, the reference list, the scope. I mean, Tate is publishing everything that has to do with teachers and teacher education. We publish different methodology. That's not what we look at, what type of methodology you use or what type of methods you use. But we look at, so how are you working with your methodology? How are you working with your methods? How do you explain that to the reader, how you're doing the research? So the first round, this is what I look at: the length, the abstract, is that clear enough? The APA format, is that, do they do that, or do I think there's going to be a lot of work with that? I look at the methodology to see how clear that is. Does it explain to me what they did? And then from there, I decide if if I'm gonna reject that manuscript or if I'm gonna put it forward. And then it goes to the reviewers, and they look at even closer. One thing I would suggest to people who are writing for the journal is to look at what have we published. What I've been doing lately is every week I take a couple of articles and I read them, and I'm comparing what I get and what we publish, and I'm realizing there is a big difference there. The what we publish is so much better than the manuscripts we get, and this is helping me figuring out what will I let go through. So those are some of the things that I would tell people to be aware of when they prepare. And then if they are rejected, if the paper is desk rejected or rejected, there is no way to try to send that in again. You have to send it somewhere else. But the review you get from the reviewers and the list you get from the editors, if people can go through that and say, okay, this is what was missing with my article, and if I want to send it further, then I can improve those things, because those things that are listed, some of them are the reason for the rejection. Some years ago, and even before I started, I heard that people were sending manuscripts to Tate because the feedback they got, they learned a lot from it. And I thought, really, they're using us? But then we are trying to go in between. We are educators, so we like to educate people and try to find out the reasons why we are not accepting, why we are rejecting. But at the same time, we don't have time to go through the all. We have 9 executive editors, and we have also 45 professionals on the international board. So this is a huge team that is working on the journal and helping out. And I must say that we are collaborating quite well. So we try to give the feedback and rationalize why we are rejecting manuscripts. I think this year I have rejected, I don't know how many, too many. I wish I didn't have to reject so many, but I have. And not very many people have written back to ask me why. Most people seem to be satisfied with the feedback that we are giving. But of course, I know that it's tough to get it and have your manuscript rejected. But at the same time, I want to remind you of what I said in the beginning today. Don't do like I did the first time and put it in the drawer. Go and look and see how can you improve. How can you do better? And I must say that many of our reviewers are strong and so good that I just love to read many of the reviews. And just to add a little bit, I must say that getting reviews from self-study personnel is just the best learning I've had. If you just sit down and take a big breath and read through, it's educative. It tells you, it really gets you into a dialogue how to improve.
Wonderful.
Okay, I think
Sorry.
I'm going to stop right now. I could continue.
Well, I'm going to ask Julian to build on something you just said about reviewer feedback, and that's sometimes the reviewer feedback is really helpful, but sometimes reviewers don't always agree with one another. So Julian, how would you recommend authors respond to that if there's contradictory feedback?
Good question. One of them could plainly be wrong. And also the editors have to take that into account. For example, if we had one reviewer who we knew was really first-rate, big name in the field, had a deep understanding, and they had a different view than someone who didn't have as much experience, we might defer a little bit more to one than the other. But also what I'd say is you want people to understand what you're saying. So if your point is not getting across to both people, there may be some ways that you can make your argument clearer to both of them. So try to find some ways to build bridges to these thoughtful people who are doing their best to understand your work. And if you don't agree, well, then say so. I don't really think I can do that. I can't go back and rewrite my research and add involving another participant. Can't do that. Sorry, it's too late. But you might at least work around it. Explain yourself in the article. Although I didn't do this, such and such, or some people might wonder, but. And you can always ask the editors to help you prioritize what's important. I know as an editor, I've sometimes done that where I've said the two reviewers are in contradiction on certain things. Here's some thoughts that might help you to navigate the space between those. Finally, as the editor who looks at them after they've been accepted, sometimes what's being accepted is still a bit rough, especially in the writing, where the reviewers have focused on, is this a good study? And it is. But then I still have to spend a lot of time saying to people, hey, this part here is really incoherent. You've really got to clear this up. And then they have to have that conversation with me and say, well, I don't understand why I need to do that, Julian. And I'll try to work with them. I don't want to put words in their mouth and say, well, maybe you should, but I might say, maybe this would work. And they may say, no, that totally misses the point. And okay, well then come up with something else. But assume that the people who are reading the work are really trying to respectfully work through your ideas and make sense of them.
Wonderful. I'm going to move us on to our last set of. Oh, yes, go
Sorry,
ahead.
Tone really matters too in the way that you're responding when you're sending in your letter related to your article. So make sure you clearly set out in your response letter how you're responding to the reviewer comments, and explaining with a gentle tone. Some people can be quite assertive when they are making their responses to the reviewer comments, and just remember that people are thoughtfully putting their ideas into your work, and you also need to take that into account in the way that you construct your response.
Great. So the last set of prepared questions are around the secrets of getting published. These might be strategies, these might be resources, but for those on the call who are really starting out, what strategies or resources can you suggest for them? And this is open to anyone who wants to answer.
Yeah, I'll get it started. The first thing I would suggest reading is Laurel Richardson's Writing as a Method of Inquiry in the Handbook of Qualitative Inquiry, because she talks about how do you write qualitative work that's not social sciencey, and she talks a lot about the quality of good writing. And something I find a lot of academic writing doesn't think about the reader. It's all about what I want to say in my study is. But really what we should be thinking about is, how is the reader taking this in? How do I link it to my reader? How do I make my introduction interesting to that reader, starting from something general they're interested in and working down to my ideas in my paper? So really think about the reader in your work. I would also suggest becoming a reviewer. I have learned so much about being a writer by being a reviewer of other people's work. So if you want to understand how it works, how the sausages are made, and become a better writer, become a reviewer. And as I said earlier in my introduction, build relationships. Claire Kosnick said to me once about a book that she invited me to write a chapter in. You know, she would generally try to choose people who were reliable and low maintenance. So, you know, if you're going to be very demanding or you're very difficult, and I'm editing a book, I may not invite you to write a chapter unless you're really, really brilliant. And I've always figured I'm not brilliant enough for people to ask me no matter what. So I've had to be nice. So I would really focus on being nice, being receptive, being the kind of person the editor of the book or the journal would want to work with in the future. Or when it's a close cut, like, do I move him forward or do I reject him? That they'll say, well, you know, he'll be cooperative, he'll probably make it work. So really building those relationships and being really reasonable, it becomes your stock in trade. And over the years, you know, I had to really hunt to find places that would take my work. Recently, I've become quite lazy because people keep inviting me to write chapters, so I almost don't need to hunt for something. And I said I have to decide which ones to say yes to. And I think that's because people have learned that I'm easy to work with and I'm reasonable. So your reputation builds as you write things. People want you. And also you develop a reputation for being somebody worth working with as well.
Great. Other strategies or resources, Hafti, Sir Mandy?
I would like to say there are no secrets to getting published. I disagree with Julian. Read and write. Just read a lot, write a lot, every day something, and then always try to do your best. I don't think there are secrets, and I think we have to remember, when we are writing, we are not writing for ourselves. We are writing for the reader. So think of the reader. Always think of the reader. That you think of who is going to read your piece, and what does that reader have to know, and think of that. So always think of the reader, and because if you want to be published, you're not writing for yourself, really. You're writing for the reader, and become a reviewer. That is just so good. And also, if you found the journal that you would like to publish in, read what they have published and look for the topic you're writing on and see what they have published already, and think, and the next step should be, how can I add to this? How can I add to this so the journal is growing, so the research topic, my research topics is growing?
Great. The last question, and I'm looking at the time, we're at 2 minutes until 7, so we might run a little over, but the last question I think is a really great one to end on. As editors, what do you wish authors knew about the publishing process? Thinking back over everything we've talked about tonight, is there any closing remarks that you would like to share with us?
Well, one thing that I compare it with from time to time is that publishing or writing to publish is a bit like the Olympic Games or any high-level international competition. It's competitive. There's a lot of people out there who are also putting in papers at the same time as you. Just listen to the number that Hafti's talked about before that was submitted to Tate each year. That's a lot. Not quite the same for studying teacher education, but still it's a competitive field. Just like a high-level sport, you need training, and it takes some time in order to build the skills that you need in order to be successful to be published. You need to understand how the game works. So it's good to have a coach, somebody that you can work with who can help you, or multiple people. If you think about the sports metaphor, there's often multiple coaches who can help you through that particular field to understand how does it work, what are the rules of the game, etc., and to work with you to develop. And finally, so it takes time, and sometimes it feels a bit unfair. And that's an experience that we might have all had with feedback that we've had from reviewers, etc., or the length of time it takes, or some part of the process. So it really does need persistence over time, recognizing that there are many aspects that need to be refined. And ultimately, it is possible to be successful, as we know, as we're here today.
I would say, yes, it's competitive, but also mainly publishing is a conversation with the community that you're a part of. And one thing to think about is, how can my work contribute to that conversation? For example, if you're writing a piece about being a new teacher educator, there's been lots of pieces on that. So one way yours can be really worthwhile is by being exceptionally good. But the other way it can be worthwhile is by adding a new element, maybe a new theoretical framework, or maybe you're working with Indigenous teacher candidates, so that's a new wrinkle that we'd like to hear about. Or maybe your identity is not the same as the majority of people who write for the journal. So but the same article written by a Black educator might be of more interest, framing a little bit about Black identity than being written by a white educator teaching white students. The fastest turnaround for me on studying teacher education a number of years ago was a piece I wrote on LGBTQ issues. And I think one of the reasons it moved quickly is there'd been nothing in the journal on that topic yet. And so I'm sure that when the editors got it, or when the reviewers got it, they thought, yes, we need something like that. And they were on my side to start because they would like to have that. So that, I think that's really important, to be aware it's a conversation that you're contributing to.
Great. Haftis, any final words?
Just get started. Just start writing and turn in your paper and see what happens. Don't wait.
If I could just offer one more little
Sure.
tip. When I was writing for a journal that in educational administration, based on some research I was doing, I didn't get a piece accepted earlier from them. So when I wanted to write this for them, I looked at a few articles in their journal, and I found a couple that looked like they'd be a good fit in terms of how they were organized for how I wanted to do my work. And then I used those as templates. And then I said, okay, that's kind of good. Now, how would I might maybe use similar headings and similar organization? When you're adding to a new discourse community, maybe you've never done self-study before, looking at several articles in the journal and saying, yeah, that's kind of like my work. You know, it's a mathematics educator and I'm writing about social justice, but I kind of like the way they organize their themes. Maybe I should follow that. So having a couple of templates that you don't follow rigorously, but that act as exemplars might be helpful, especially if you're moving into a different community with a different communication style than the one you're used to.
Great, thank you. Looking at the clock, it is a few minutes past the hour, so we are going to wrap up. I would like to first and foremost thank all of our panelists for sharing with us this evening, and encourage everyone on the call and everyone watching this webinar later to connect with us. The SIG has an active Facebook page and also a Twitter account. We would also love for you to join us at AERA as a member of the SIG. If you need more information on how to do those things, my email address is here on the screen. But also, Eliza and I would love to hear from you if you have topics in mind for future webinars. So again, reach out to either one of us about getting more connected, getting involved, and if you have topics in mind. The last thing I would point out in that orange box along the bottom is our SIG website, and that is where you can find this recording. It will be posted by the end of the week. So I apologize for not having time to get to your questions, but reach out, connect with us. Any one of us would just love to continue this conversation with you. have a great evening, night, morning, afternoon, whatever you're off to. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.